All right. Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to continue with the next part of today's proceedings. I'd just like to remind you that we have some QR codes on each table if you'd like to scan it just to get the program if you want to follow the program. Also, there is a conversation that is taking place on social media with regards to the Winter School for IR. If you would like to follow that conversation, please use the hashtag Winter School for IR. Right now, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Please remember that we have 5 minutes after each speaker has presented for questions. So if you do have any questions, just try to jot them down and then we will pose your questions to the speaker and we will have them answer them. Our next speaker is an associate professor in the Department of Chemical Sciences. She obtained her PhD from the University of the Witwatersrand in 2011. Her research interests are mostly in the field of environmental chemistry with a specific focus on the removal of heavy metal ions and organic pollutants for industrial effluents. Speaking to us this morning on nanotechnology, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Professor Krivishan Pillay.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to you. It gives me pleasure to introduce you to the topic of nanotechnology, which is really a very important topic at UJ, largely because we are conducting a lot of research on this new emerging technology. But before we delve into what nanotechnology is, I want to caution you that this is a highly interactive session. So I'm going to start off by showing you a video clip. And then after that, there are going to be some questions based on the video clip, which I'm going to allow you a few minutes to answer. And thereafter, we'll have a general discussion. So we're going to do more of an activity-based interaction here today. And so if you have a smartphone or a laptop in front of you, you can access the video via the Google website. You can either click on the squares on the top right-hand corner, click on YouTube, and then enter the URL address I've given. Or alternately, if you can't access it that way, you can go directly onto Google, type the URL address that I've given, and click on search. Okay, so that's two ways to access it if you want to view it on your smartphone or on the laptop, but we are going to play it now on the big screen for you. So please enjoy the short video clip and pay very careful attention to the detail, because then I'm going to have some questions based on that.
Today, we are going to talk about nanotechnology. When we say something is nano, we mean it is very small. The size of 1 nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter, which is about 100,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. Making new things at this incredibly small scale is called nanotechnology, and it's one of the most exciting and fast-moving areas of science today. Some nanomaterials are naturally occurring. You can find them everywhere, in volcanic ash, ocean spray, fine sand, and dust. Naturally occurring nanostructures are also present in plants and animals. For example, nanostructures in insect eyes ensure an anti-reflection and water-repelling effect, so they can fly safely. Nowadays, scientists can create nanostructures themselves. By rearranging the atoms of an object, they can make new nanomaterial with new properties. For example, that are stronger, lighter, or different in color. The properties change also according to their size, and this is the magic of the technology. In the food area, researchers are working with nanotechnologies to create novel products that may be of benefit to health and diet. For example, Nanosilver has antibacterial properties that can be used in food contact material such as cutting boards. In food supplements, nano-sized carriers increase absorption of nutrients. Nanosensors can be incorporated into packaging to monitor the quality and shelf life of food from manufacturers to consumers. It can also make food ingredients tastier or healthier. Carving up a grain of salt into small nano-sized grains increases its surface area significantly. This means that your food needs far less salt to be equally tasty. This is good news for those who like crackers but are worried about their blood pressure. We need to make sure that food nanotechnologies do not cause harm to consumers. This is why in the EU, engineered nanomaterials in food require a safety assessment. Their specific properties need to be taken into account when assessing impact on human health and the environment. And this is where EFSA comes in. Over the coming years, nanotechnology will touch the lives of all of us. Like many scientific advances, it brings uncertainty and potential risks. It is up to scientists, business, and governments to make it work.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that and learned something from it. Now, just when we go back to my slides, I will project up the questions, maybe give you about 10 minutes or so to think about it, and then we'll have a general discussion. Okay, so here are the questions. Basically, you should have been able to grasp from that video what nanotechnology is all about. In particular, how does the nano-sized or the nanometer itself relate to the meter? Some examples from everyday life, nanomaterials we come across, some of the ways in which this technology has benefited the food industry, some of the disadvantages associated with this technology, what criteria we need to consider when implementing it, and then what is EFSA, and do we have something similar in South Africa? So take your time, 10 minutes, have a thought on it, and you're free to use your smartphones, laptops, to get any additional information you want. I can walk around and assist if you'd like, and then in 10 minutes we'll have a general discussion about it. Okay, can we have some thoughts or suggestions as to what nanotechnology is? Do not be afraid to answer a question. There is a mobile microphone roaming around. Can we have someone tell us in their own words what you've picked up from the video or any other resources that you've looked at? Okay, yes.
So it's technology involving very, very small things.
Yes, precisely. I mean, what we're trying to do with this technology is to synthesize smaller materials from bulk materials. So basically, it's the study of nanomaterials and how we can actually use them to develop new technologies. Lots of scientists like to just call it the science of the small, right? It's because you would have seen on the video clip, nano size is a very small size, okay? The second question is an easy one. You should be able to tell me, what is the relationship between the nanometer and the meter?
I believe it's a billionth of a meter.
Yes, thank you. 10 to 5? Yes, ma'am?
Well, I found this, I don't know if it's correct because I'm not a scientist. I found volcanic ashes as one example and humid substances as another example.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear the second part. Human?
Humid, from
Humid?
humidity.
Humid substances. Okay, humidity, right? Okay, so there's two examples there, volcanic ash, humidity. Anyone else spotted any other examples from the video? Any other? Come on, girls, what's your best friend? What's your best friend? It was on the video clip. Diamonds, diamond structure. What else did you see on the video clip? Sorry? Leaves, yes. Gold nanoparticles, yes. Anything else? Sorry? Pollen, yes. Pollen is one of them, right? So we have several examples from everyday life that can be structured into nanostructured forms, or they make up nanomaterials, right? Now, what the video focused on was the food industry. I don't know whether you paid much attention to that part, but have you picked up ways in which it actually has been beneficial to the food industry? There was a lot said about the food industry in the video clip. Yes, sir. Salt, yes. The salt can be broken down into finer nano-sized crystals, and that makes your food taste better, right? It's beneficial to people who have high blood pressure that cannot afford to take too much salt in their diet, okay? So the smaller the size of your salt crystals, the less of it you have to use, right? That was one that was discussed in the video. Any other benefits to the food industry that you may have picked up on? Would you like your food to spoil? Or would you like to use utensils that could spoil your food or have bacteria growing on them? So what did they say about the silver nanoparticles? What properties does silver have? Antibacterial, yes, antibacterial. That's also beneficial when you're using your utensils to handle food. Something about the absorption of nutrients as well, right? What you find is the size of these nanomaterials, because they are so small, they give you a larger surface area. That favors absorption, and that helps in the absorption of nutrients as well, right? We've even exploited that idea to develop new adsorbents for water treatment so that we can remove pollutants from water. So I know I'm deviating from the main issue here, which is the food industry, right? But it's just giving you an idea of some of the advantages and some of the benefits that this technology has had. And then one very important thing, the quality control of the food. There's nanosensors involved there, right? But there's something that one has to do, one has to consider about these nanomaterials that can make them disadvantageous. In what way are they disadvantageous? Poisons, yes. Toxicity, right? So the toxicity, it's nice to develop these new materials, it's nice to use them, but toxicological testing is very important. And you saw in the video clip, there's hazard identifications that are necessary as well, right? And there has to be an authority or a body to certify that this material can be used. Okay, so some of the criteria we've touched on, it's their hazardous properties, right? The potential toxic effects that they can have to animals and humans, right? That's important to consider. And then, can you tell me what EFSA is? The European Food Safety Authority. Can anyone tell me if we have a similar authority in South Africa? Food control, yes, we do. We do have a food control. And I think the South African Bureau of Standards also plays a role in quality control when it comes to food items as well. Now, it's important to have these measures in place because, like I said to you, it's nice to have a new technology. It's nice to use it, but we must weigh the benefits against the disadvantages as well. Okay, so that was just a thought-provoking idea to give you a general overview of nanotechnology and some of the benefits it has. Now I'm going to give you another activity to do, and we're going to play a game called Study the Picture, right? What I've given you there is a picture of a painted glass window from the Renaissance period. This is something you'll come across in churches and so on, right? I want you to take 5 minutes just to focus on that picture and see if there's anything there that you can relate to nanotechnology. Just 5 minutes. Look at it carefully, and I'm interested to see what you come up with there. If I may give you a clue, focus on the colors. Okay, can we have some suggestions as to what you've seen in that picture that gives you any kind of clue or link to nanotechnology? Has anybody come up with anything? This is a tricky one, I agree. Any suggestions? Yes, ma'am.
You would not mind me, please, because I don't actually know what nanotechnology all means. But from this picture, I could count like 19, 20 faces.
The faces. So you're saying the faces are linked to nanotechnology. Okay, I see what you're getting at. You're trying to go further and further down, break up that whole painting into smaller pieces. Okay. Any other suggestions?
I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I was going to say that the colors that are used, they are nanoparticles that, in a way, have a telling influence on which color at the end of the whole process a particular piece is going to look like.
You've got it perfectly correct, right? The paints that are used to generate those colors, they're made up of metallic nanoparticles, copper, chromium nanoparticles, and so forth. So, anyway, my whole point in showing you this picture is for you to understand that yes, we've only recently become aware of nanotechnology, say maybe in the last 30 years or so, because with advanced technology, we've managed to realize that these nano-sized materials can exist. But it's actually been in our lives since the Renaissance period. So it's always been there. It's just that we became aware of it as technology developed, as science developed. Okay. Now, sorry, it's showing twice. Now, I don't know whether you guys like debates or arguments, right? But just for another 10 minutes or so, I see you already seated at tables with someone's, I think there's only one gentleman sitting alone, but you're free to join another group. Just amongst your colleagues at your table, I want you to have a short discussion on, based on what you've learned about nanotechnology today, and really it's only the tip of the iceberg because there hasn't been a lot of time. It's just an introduction, really. There's a lot more to this technology. But what you've learned basically, can you see it as a technology that can be developed to solve some of South Africa's everyday problems? And the key to that is identifying what are South Africa's everyday problems and how we could try to use this technology to solve those problems. Just a general discussion. It doesn't have to be very scientific, but based on your general knowledge and what you've learned today. Maybe discuss with the person at your table, and then we'll have a general feedback in another 10 minutes. Okay, and I will walk around from table to table, so you'll have an opportunity to interact with me as well.
Condensed milk and stuff. Not like they're getting homemade or Kauai or anything. No, don't worry about it. Yes, it's fine. It's fine.
Because that's how I understood it. It's not me standing and talking all the time.
Yes, yeah. I just think that people are a little bit low key now because they've had 2 long days and energy is probably a problem.
I think it's a bit late. You should have it earlier.
Yes, yeah. Sorry about
No,
that.
it's not a
I
problem.
could have had a conversation maybe to. Well, you know what, Andre and I were saying that even for academics and people who have been thinking about this, a whole day is just a bit too much.
Yeah, it is. The attention span.
True.
And after a heavy lunch, you know what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then after this, we'll just wrap up. It's a short discussion, and I got a few more slides, and we'll be done.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. He's here. He's sitting over there with. Okay, we can actually connect him here. And then, Martin. He's sitting behind. Well, I would prefer to soldier through and leave earlier.
Yeah, just
less traffic.
Okay, I believe it's afternoon. We're all tired. We want to wrap up early. So you've had an opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves. Now, can I have some thoughts or suggestions as to whether you think this technology can be developed in the future to solve some of South Africa's key problems? I had a suggestion. Sorry, I will tell them what you discussed with me. A suggestion over the break was accidents. Road accidents are a big problem in South Africa. Perhaps we can develop smart nanotechnologies to prevent road accidents. Now, the question is how, right? And the answer there would be in smart sensors. If you have a sensor in your vehicle that can warn you of an approaching vehicle, that might help. Okay? That was one suggestion that came across. Has anybody thought of anything else? Yes, so tell us what you've thought about. Go ahead, it's fine. It's okay. Tell us what you've thought.
So we were thinking of how we're getting smart everything nowadays, like smart cities, smartphones, smart everything. So we've also got smart food. So like Future Life. So if we could get compact versions of that, like maybe like a biscuit-sized compact version of Future Life, and it would be easier to, like, say, for instance, distribute to refugee camps, or one of the suggestion was to the army when they are on their duties. So yeah.
Yeah, good idea. Not a bad one at all. It touches on the problem with food scarcity, food supplies, and poverty is one of the problems in this country. Food scarcity is also a problem. So we could look at that, and also in terms, but the issue is also cost. When it comes to implementing such technologies, one has to think about cost as well. How cost effective will it be? So, like I said, it can go into a great debate. On the one hand, it's something that's good, it's new, it's developing, it's up and coming. On the other hand, what are the cost benefits? What are the cost risks? So those are things to think about as well. Any other suggestions? Okay, let's look at some thoughts which I shared in a public lecture, which I gave on nanotechnology recently. Here's some of the various applications in which they've been used. Drug delivery, something that's important in terms of the medical field, medical imaging, anti-cancer therapy, packaging. Obviously, there is a need for energy storage devices. We have a problem with energy storage. And then the two key areas which I tend to focus on is water treatment, and we recently started a nanoforensic research group in our department, right? Now, just to give you an idea what sort of nanoforensic research we're doing, we're developing new nanomaterials for fingerprint detection. And here's one example of a material which we developed from potato peel waste. We developed it into a fine zinc oxide nanopowder, and we were able to use it for latent fingerprint detection. So I'm touching on two very important problems in South Africa, the one of poor water quality, and the other one is crime. I think we all agree crime is a very serious problem in South Africa at the moment. So some ideas can come to mind. We have these huge water treatment plants that are doing their job, but maybe not as effectively as we'd like them to. So how about coming up with a nano-sized water treatment plant that can do it more efficiently for the delivery of better quality water, right? That's one idea. The other one is, I think in particular, I'm sure some of you guys are familiar even with the Doornfontein campus. We sometimes have this big issue of students getting mugged, staff getting mugged. So crime is really getting out of hand. So two items that commonly get stolen are cell phones, and some of my female students have even complained about jewelry. So if we can somehow take our nanotechnology and embed smart sensors into our smartphones and our jewelry that can not only detect the fingerprint image of the owner, but also realizes that if someone tries to steal your phone, it's actually not the owner of the phone, and sends a signal to the police department, the nearest police department, to help them track the criminal. That will be a nice technology to develop in the future to help us solve crimes. And you can extend this to credit or card fraud in general. Also, you've heard about cable theft. That's becoming quite a big problem as well. We can extend it to that. And just to touch on the idea of road accidents as well. A lot of our road accidents are due to drunken driving. So how about if we develop smart nanosensors that we can put into our vehicles, which can detect ethanol on the breath of a driver and send a signal to an engine telling it not to start and not allow the driver to drive off. So it's things like that we need to be thinking about for the future in terms of taking this technology forward, right? So I'm leaving you with this with this little website address because it's got a nice animation of nano motors or nano engines, nano machines, and how they can move about to bring about a new technology for a future. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this interaction. I'm sorry about the timing. It's late afternoon. Everyone's tired, and I'm sorry I got you to think a bit, but I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kriveshni. Do we have any questions that we'd like to ask her? All right, if we don't have any more questions, then I'd like to call on our next speaker for this afternoon. Our next speaker is a qualified chartered accountant and obtained his MCOM accounting cum laude. He completed an executive education course through the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on artificial intelligence and implications for business strategy. He is a winner of the VC Award at the University of Johannesburg for 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak to us on a topic that continues on end, the fourth industrial revolution for accountants, please help me welcome Mr. Hussein Kuvadia.
Thank you everyone for having me here today. I mean, it's an honor and privilege to be talking to you in this setting here today. What I'm going to be speaking about today is the role of a chartered accountant in the future, in this futuristic world of 4IR. Many chartered accountants have many questions on what their role would be in this future. And I think they've got a very important role to play in businesses and where they can take South African businesses into the fourth industrial revolution. We'll look at some of the roles that a CA can play, and especially in the accounting profession. We'll then probably look at some of the machine learning tools and natural language processing tools that can be used. We'll position this within a hypothetical case study as well. And lastly, we'll touch on a very, very important point, which is ethics. I think ethics is going to play a huge role in AI, and the way a chartered accountant can play a vital role going forward. So, like I've said, chartered accountants have this question and they ask, what will their role be in this futuristic world of AI? And I don't think this question can be answered with complete certainty at this point in time, because many of these technologies are still in early developmental stages in many companies across the board. But I don't think this question can be ignored at this point. So I think the answer for chartered accountants is to follow a lifelong learning path and equip themselves with the skills for this futuristic world. So the question now leads to, how does a chartered accountant prepare for this lifelong learning within AI? And I have 3 points that I want to paint this picture. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to paint a picture for you and paint a picture for the CA out there that they can follow in starting this lifelong learning journey within the fourth industrial revolution. Firstly, and the first point is that there's not going to be one silver bullet at this point in time of AI technology that will solve all of your problems. Yes, Prof. Rory Ryan mentioned it yesterday in his opening speech. There may be general artificial intelligence, but that is not available at this moment in time. So it's going to be a combination of various AI technologies coming together. And I think it's the CA's responsibility to understand those AI technologies. Secondly, I think it's imperative that a CA obtains some knowledge on machine learning, natural language processing, robotics, etc., to start this journey of lifelong learning. And I think lastly, or not lastly, thirdly in this process, the CA needs to think about their current business processes and innovating new processes using AI. I think that's so important, and we'll touch on this point slightly a bit later in building this entire picture for the CA of the future. What this does is it creates new business processes, it takes business processes that are currently in operations, and it teams them up with AI technologies to create this future entity that will be 4IR compliant. And then lastly, we've touched on this point, it's ethics. Ethics is going to play a huge role for chartered accountants. Chartered accountants can actually take data, understand if the data that has been used valid, accurate, complete, has it been sourced from ethical places? And those are kind of things that CAs can provide users of financial statements. They can provide assurance to users of financial statements if the data has been collected. But we'll touch on that point as we go through this presentation. So let us look at one of the roles a CA could play. And I think it's not an exhaustive list, but it's something a CA can look forward to in their business, in their role they're currently in. And that is creating a roadmap that involves all role players in the business. Currently, CAs, they are positioned where they have an overview of the entire business. So they can bring through leadership, finance, IT, operations, HR, all various role players in the business to create this roadmap for AI implementation. So this diagram I have over here brings together some of the aspects I think a CA needs to think about in creating this roadmap. Let's start off by looking at the first point. I think, firstly, it is imperative to have a comprehensive understanding of various business processes. And I think a CA would have this understanding of the various business processes within their business. Secondly, gaining a basic understanding of various AI tools. I think that is essential. If you're going to create this futuristic roadmap for your entity, have basic understanding of various AI tools is essential in this process. Thirdly, I think because the CA will be using this data or the results from the AI tool, they need to initiate the process for AI implementation. They should not leave it for some data scientist or other technical expert to come through and start or initiate the process within a company. They should take the initiative and actually start the process for AI implementation. If we go on, I think this coupled with the next point is really important. You need to identify processes that can be replaced or enhanced by AI that cut across business functions. So there's some researchers that suggest that AI implemented on its own in isolation may fail. But AI that is implemented across many business functions, across a business, has a more chance of actually adding value to your business. So I think, once again, the CA is perfectly positioned within the business to look at the various business processes and identify processes that can be replaced or enhanced by AI. And then lastly, and I think this is the most important point, once you identify that business process, to implement an AI solution that ties into the company's overall strategy is of utmost importance, because that is where value is going to come in the business. Once you tie to the overall company's strategy, that is when you start adding value to your organization. So if all of these points come together, I think a CA can create a conducive AI environment that cuts across business functions that could add value to their business. So I think that is starting to paint this picture for you. You know, you've got this responsibility as a CA, create this roadmap for your company, for your organization, to start implementing AI. These are some of the points that I would take into consideration. I think there are two other points that I'd like to discuss as well, which I think a CA should look at and also bring into their roadmap, and that is data as well as technical expertise. So the first one on data, I think that's going to play a huge role in the decisions made by CAs of whether to implement a certain AI tool or not. The questions you've got to ask yourself is, do I have access to the required data? Does my systems currently collect that data, or do I need to get this data from an outside source? And then the question of ethics comes in. Can I ethically collect this data to achieve my desired outcome? And I think these are important questions to aid to this roadmap that we're talking about in creating this 4IR for your company. The next point is technical expertise. I think this is also a very important point. You need to understand, do you have the necessary technical expertise to achieve your desired outcome? Do you need to buy in the technical expertise? But I think also coupled with technical expertise, you've got to ask yourself, does this AI tool that you want to use currently exist? And what has its success track record been? Because if it's there, why not just use it within your company? So I think that's an important question that you need to start asking your technical experts. Is there an AI tool like this? Has anyone used it? And what is the success track record been of those tools? So bringing all of this together, and we're talking about this roadmap, and this has been adapted from Executive Guide to AI. I think there's a 4-step process that CAs can start using to understand how to implement AI within their business. And the first point looks at identification. Identify various processes that can be replaced or enhanced by AI that cut across business functions and importantly must align to the company's overall strategy. That's the most important thing. It must align to the strategy so it adds value to your business. The second one is understanding AI. So I think it's really important that CAs need to understand the various tools at their disposal. Yes, they don't need to create other tools, but they need to understand what tools they have at their disposal. Thirdly, the data required. So based on the tool that you've identified that you want to use, you've got to ask the questions. Can I collect this data ethically? Do my current systems collect this data? Do I need to implement new systems to actually collect this data? And then lastly, the technical expertise. And we've touched on this. Do we have the necessary technical expertise? And has this task successfully been performed previously? And I think if you follow this 4-step process, I think you're starting to understand on how to implement AI within your business. I think it's a starting point. It's not an exhaustive list of things that you need to consider, but I think you're starting to ask the right questions for AI implementation within your specific space. So just looking at this roadmap, I think the roadmap should include a short, medium, and long-term strategy. I think in the short term, you've got to look at tools that currently exist and have been implemented so you can take those tools forward, understand how AI is impacting your business, and that will allow you to start this conducive AI environment. In your medium term plan, I think you should look at emerging technologies. Emerging technologies that you could explore further through pilot projects or something like that. And then lastly, I think you need to partner with a reliable expert to look at AI questions that have not been solved elsewhere. So I think I'll take this roadmap, I'll take the 4-step process as a CA, I'll start looking at business processes, identify the processes that you want to change that actually ties in with your company's overall strategy, and then create a roadmap for the short, medium, and long term. And I think that puts your company in a good place for the 4th Industrial Revolution. So now what I'd like to do is just take that 4-step process that we discussed and maybe position it within a case study that we've created, a short case study, and then look at some real-life examples of how companies are currently using machine learning as well as natural language processing, and some of the results they have gained from that, as well as the impact it could have on you as a chartered accountant in financial statements or users of financial statements. So we've just created a very short case study. I'm just going to paint a picture for you of this case study. We've chosen a private higher education as a case study. It's an all-inclusive institution. It provides training to corporates through short learning courses. The courses are currently only available on a face-to-face basis. However, it's the institution's vision to roll out online qualifications in the next year and to phase out face-to-face lectures. The institution also has a strong research focus because this has a direct impact on its funding model. But I think the most important thing for any business is their key strategic objectives. So we've listed some of the objectives that we think this institution would have. The institution will become an only online institution over the next 2 years. The funding model must be improved over the next 2 years. The aim is to get more funding from government. This is directly related to the number of research articles the institution publishes. The institution must reduce risk that surrounds various contracts, and we'll have a look at this on natural language processing and how we can address this specific key strategic objective. So that is, the institution must reduce risk around various contracts that are signed with industry and get maximum benefit out of these partnerships. Over the next 2 years, the student experience needs to be enhanced through technology. And lastly, a key strategy would be to reduce costs over the next 2 years. This must be done through better predictions with regards to budgets and forecasts. So what we've got here is some key strategic points. What we will do is take that 4-step process of identification and the other steps and position them within this case study. We'd look at some of the business processes and see if we can identify if we can actually add a machine learning tool or natural language processing tool to actually address some of these points. So the first business process that we've come up with within this hypothetical case study is at the start of the academic year, the head of the program would need to complete a budget of forecasts, which would need to be approved for the year ahead. This would require a review of the previous year's actual results and a best estimation of what to expect in the year ahead. So one of the key strategic objectives of this hypothetical a company or institution is that they want to reduce costs over the next few years. And one of the ways in which you can reduce costs is actually to have better forecasts and budgets. So can we now take this 4-step process and identify if a machine learning tool can actually do better predictions for us? So the very first point is identification. A CA would need to identify this business process. In this case, we've given you the process. However, in real life, a CA would need to identify this process. The process here identified is that if identified is budgeting and forecasting. Right? If this process can be improved, it will have a direct impact on the strategic objective of the institution of reducing costs in the future. So what AI method can we use? We can use a machine learning algorithm to provide us with better forecasts and budgeting predictions. So that's what we want to do. We want to take a machine learning algorithm to actually provide us with better forecasts and predictions. What data would be required? You probably need data from your internal systems, from your current systems. You'd probably also need data from external sources, and that's where the ethical question comes out. You probably want to get some market sentiment of how people looking to take your courses in the future to do a better forecast or budget. Then we ask the question, technical expertise. What technical expertise would we require in this? So the question, we probably need some technical expertise for somebody to come up with the algorithm and create the algorithm for us, put in the data, teach the machine, all of those things. But I think the important question to ask here, is there a current tool that actually does this? And the answer is probably yes. There are tools that do predictions. There are machine learning tools that do predictions. Can we use them over here? What has the success track record of these tools been for other companies? And those are kind of questions you'll ask your technical expert before deciding to implement this tool. So if you look at the impact of this algorithm, the machine algorithm will be used as a prediction tool. It will identify trends and anomalies in the budget that could be investigated further by humans. And that's where your cost savings probably will come in. So if it flags something and that amount should, or whatever value should not be in your budget or forecast, you could then have further cost savings in your business. It could also flag issues and pinpoint risk areas. And risk is a really important point for CAs, and which will help you make better business decisions in the end. So that is positioning, that is kind of the thought process that would go through a CA's mind in trying to decide whether to implement an AI tool within their business or not. Let us look at a few real-life examples and continuing on the machine learning prediction tools. We've got here an example of PayPal. They've used almost 4 billion transactions that they've analyzed, and they've analyzed this to detect fraud. Now, one of the major strategic points for a banking sector or financial sector is reducing fraud. So how can they use a machine learning algorithm to actually reduce one of the key strategic objectives? So what they've done is they've analyzed 4 billion transactions, and they've identified fraud. They've predicted which transactions would have fraud and who would actually have fraud within, or when will fraud actually take place, and they've taken the necessary steps. Their fraud rate is just 0.32%, where the industry average is 1.32%. So here they, once again, using a machine learning prediction tool to actually enhance their key strategic objective, which is fraud identification. Second one, a real life example that we can look at is managing risk. So one of the strategies for any insurance firm would be to reduce the risk of the firm. And here we've got one of the insurance companies that uses one of Google's prediction tools. And what they want to do is identify customers that will have a high risk in the future, that will have a high loss. And what they do is then adjust their premiums accordingly. And when they adjust their premiums accordingly, they're actually reducing the risk of the company. Imagine what impact that would have for a CA in the financial statements. If you can now manage your risk in the future, giving more assurance to the users of financial statements. What they have done is they've used 70 different input variables in this machine learning algorithm. So you can just think about the data around that. That's a lot of data or different variables that would be required. Through this machine learning algorithm, they've had a 78% accuracy rate. Previously, they only had a 40% accuracy rate on predicting who will create a high loss for them. So this has, once again, managed risk. And risk, like I've said, is an important point for CAs to manage. At the end of the day, you are going to give assurance to many stakeholders on the financial statements. And if you can reduce the risk around many of these transactions that are taking place, you can give better assurance to those using the financial statements. Lastly, looking at predicting again, we've got a sale predictions. Now, once again, for a CA to predict what sales would actually take place would impact the inventory balances on the financial statements in a major way. So here we've got a German retailer that uses a machine learning algorithm to predict what sales they would have in the next 30 days. And they claim they can predict with 90% accuracy which goods will be sold in the next 30 days. This has reduced surplus stock by a fifth, while returns have reduced by more than 2 million items. So just think about what impact that would have on the financial statements. If you're reducing your stock balance by a fifth, think about net realizable value. If stock holding is too high, you may have to write down items to net realizable value. Think about the provisions you'd have to raise at year end for the 2 million items that have been, that now they're not the returns. You know, you've got to raise provisions at year end. Possibly some provisions are raised at year end, but now you've got 2 million items that have been reduced, that have not been returned, because they could better predict what sales would take place. So these are things that CAs need to start thinking about. Yes, you're going to play important, you're not going to create these tools. You're probably not going to create the tools, but you need to start understanding how to use these tools to manage risk, to manage sales, to manage all of the business processes within your entity. Just two other examples that move away from predictions. We've got a supermarket chain that uses image analysis, and they scan shelves to identify when the shelves are empty. And what that does is make sure that they don't lose any revenue. So once again, we're looking at the revenue line item on your financial statements. This will ensure that revenue is up there and there's not much changes in the revenue line item year on year. If we now move over to natural language processing, so that is machine learning just in a nutshell. It just shows you what's possible and how to think about it. And if you start using machine learning tools within your business, you could reduce risk, you could do better predictions, you could save costs, and all of these other things within your business if you understand the tool and you implement it correctly. With natural language processing, I'm just going to take you back again to the hypothetical case study. Let's look at one of the business processes, position it within that hypothetical case study through our 4-step process that we discussed, and then we'll look at some real-life examples as well. So in this hypothetical case study, we have one of the business processes is that multiple MOUs need to be signed by the head of program with stakeholders from industry. This ensures that there is a link between academia and the commercial world. The head of program needs to ensure that their agreements are in line with the institution's policies and there are no clauses which could cause undue risk to the institution or could cause harm to the institution. So for any business, if you sign in an agreement, you want to reduce that risk. So here, identification. The business process is got to do with MOUs with various stakeholders. To identify clauses that may cause risk to the institution ties in with one of the key strategic objectives of any business. So one of our key strategic objectives was to reduce risk with these MOUs for our institution. And now, once we sign these contracts, we want to identify this business process because it ties in with our key strategic objective. Understanding the AI method, we could use a natural language processing tool, search tool, to extract metadata from the contract. And we could also use this tool to compare contracts to a model contract to identify any clauses that should not be there. The data required, you probably need contracts from your current systems to identify a contract that is a sample contract that we could compare to. Once again, the question to ask is, do we have the data available? Do we need to get this data from external sources? Can we externally get this data from ethical places? And the ethical question comes up again. The technical expertise, there's a number of software solutions currently in the market that could be used. However, I still think you need a technical expert to interpret the results. You'd also need to ask the technical expert, what has been the success track record of these other programs or softwares that are currently available before you make use of that natural language processing tool. So what is the impact of this algorithm? This kind of tool helps to identify risk areas before signing any contract. It helps to reduce the overall risk level of the institution. The tool can also be used to find other hidden information in the contract, such as unfavorable renewal terms. And we'll actually see that in one of the real-life examples that we'll get through. So once again, we've used this 4-step process just to start positioning our businesses within 4IR. It's your starting point. You can use this 4-step process, think about your business processes, and start identifying if you can change some of the business processes to include 4IR within them. If we go to the natural language processing examples, we've got a healthcare company that actually uses a NLP tool for procurement contracts. So what they've done is they've been able to use this tool. They've identified hidden risks and savings. So they even went one step further. Besides even identifying risks in this contract, they identified potential savings that could happen in the future by changing certain terms within these contracts. And I think that's so important for a CA to actually be cognizant of when they're signing contracts. You need to understand what clauses are there and what risks are there, but also what savings could happen in the future. We also have Slaughter and May that do many mergers and acquisitions. And I mean, a CA will be involved in mergers and acquisitions all the time. What is the transaction value? What is the value of the merger and acquisition? What is being bought over? They use software that can scroll through or go through about 30,000 documents in an hour. In a normal due diligence, only about 10% of documents are analyzed, where if you currently use this natural language processing tool, you can analyze all the documents and you can get a better picture of what is actually being done in this merger and acquisition. So those are natural language processing tools examples. I just want to bring you through to some other examples that use NLP, such as chatbots. We've got a clothing retailer, Face, that uses IBM Watson system. What they do is they allow customers to interact with the system, and 60% of their purchases are now done through this chatbot. So the chatbot actually provides the customer with insight into the clothing they're going to purchase. That's just something interesting to note. Also, what you can think about is your own company and how you can improve processes within your own company. So maybe you could use a chatbot for the IT department. I know UJ has done that now to answer certain queries. We've got SEB Bank that has done that, and it answered 4,000 queries within the first 3 weeks. And that freed up time for staff to do other things. So I think these are things you need to start thinking about as a CA. How can you start using all of these tools to add value to your business? And those are some of the examples. So lastly, I think this is a really, really important point, and everyone is surprised when I mention ethics in AI and where does this fit in. And I think, the CA can play a really important role, because at the end of the day, when you're auditing financial statements, you are giving assurance that those financial statements are correct. You've got integrated reports that provide much wider assurance. So what a CA can do, and maybe this is a new business avenue for CAs as well, they can provide assurance to users of financial statements in the integrated report as to whether the data used by companies to make decisions are from ethical sources and is not biased in a certain way. Now we're going to come to bias and how a machine can be biased, and I'll talk about 3 different ways in which a machine can be biased. The first one on machine bias is that a person may manipulate data for a desired outcome. And when we know about all the problems in South Africa, if there's a tender maybe or something like that, and you want to have a certain person get the tender, you can manipulate the data in that way. Who's giving assurance now that the machine learning algorithm is not biased in that sense? We need controls in place. And I think a CA can play an important role in designing controls and monitoring these controls and creating a framework to actually give users of the financial statements some assurance that these machine learning algorithms are not biased in a certain way. So that's just one example of machine bias that we may look at. The second example of machine bias, and this one is a bit more difficult to detect, that is inherently within the data that you have within your company, could be biased in a certain way. But companies need to be aware of this. So when you're making a decision, you need to be aware that your data might be biased in a certain direction, and you need to be cognizant of that fact. So once again, a CA can play a very important role. What are the controls in place to ensure that this machine bias is not taking place? The data that we currently have is not biased in a certain way. Who's giving assurance for that? And this might be a new revenue stream for maybe auditing firms to take upon in the future. And then the last one, and this is an interesting one, this is not really machine bias in a typical sense, but this is where a machine learns from interactions with other participants. Now, companies can lead into a lot of trouble by just leaving this open. If we look at Microsoft, they had a chatbot that learned from interactions with people, and within 15 hours it was thought to be racist. And then they had to take down the chatbot. So who in the company is actually ensuring that we're not going to use chatbots or whatever it is that learn from interactions? And when it learns from interactions, how do you know that the data that it's learning is not biased in a certain way? And these are things that companies need to start thinking about before they start implementing AI tools, which I think are very important going forward. So in total, what I think is a CA is going to play an important role in many businesses for the future. I don't think the role of a CA is just eliminated like that by AI. I think they're going to add to the AI world. I think ethics is going to play a huge role. I also think that if they understand machine learning, natural language processing, robotics, and all the other components of AI, they can add value to their companies and make sure that South Africa as a whole in the business sector actually move forward from an AI perspective. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Hussein, for that enlightening discussion that you've just had with us. Do we have any questions that we would like to ask him?
Of course you do. What do you mean?
Yes.
Hussein, thank you for that. I think this is one of the fields where I think this discussion is important and will increasingly be important as we move forward. I immediately wondered about 2 things as you were talking. The first one is that it sounded to me like you spoke a lot about the role of a CA in a company as a financial director or whatever, but it didn't sound to me like you spoke as much about the role of a CA as an auditor. And I'd be interested, you won't be able to expand on it now, but would those same 4 steps play a role there? Or maybe let me just ask that question first, and then I've got a second question that's completely a different direction.
Okay, so yeah, I think I took it from a business perspective and not from an auditing perspective. I do think, so there are other elements that would impact the auditors in the future. I think if these tools are start to be used by companies, I do think that auditors would need to look at using these tools to make decisions on the financial statement. So it would impact the auditor from an accounting, auditing, tax, and finance perspective. I do have a presentation on that as well, but it does impact them on that. On
Okay,
that
no,
side as well.
I suspected something like that. I was just checking that I understood it correctly. My second question is, I don't quite know how to phrase it. I'm worried when you speak about taking tools that work and applying them in other businesses. And the reason I'm worried about that is because what I've figured out, I think, a little bit over the past 2 days is that AI is in essence a machine in the end. And the assumptions that are used and the settings, for lack of a better word, that are used in the beginning will determine how it functions. And obviously those in of themselves can insert bias that you spoke about before. Wouldn't an accountant and or an auditor have to be either involved in the setting up of those settings and systems or audit them to make sure that they are properly done? Because, I mean, we heard some young engineering students speak yesterday about using a variety of 4IR-related technologies to solve problems. And I thought they did a brilliant job. So what I'm going to say next is not a criticism of them, but I'm immediately worried about them not being audiologists or psychologists, and they're working in the field of psychology now. And I'm immediately worried here about computer experts working in the field of accountancy, and they're not accountants. You know, so how do we ensure that these tools are actually giving us good information?
Okay, so just to answer the first part of that question, taking a tool from elsewhere and actually using it here is not taking the tool exactly like it is. So what it means is understanding. So if it's a prediction tool, right? So say somebody has used a prediction tool for budgeting and forecasting. Let's use that as an example. So if a company has used it, you can understand what have they done, what inputs have they put into that algorithm? Does the algorithm exist? Do I need to create it? Probably not. It does exist. What inputs did they use, and what was the output of it? So we're not saying take that algorithm exactly like they used it, but understanding if there is something like that and if it worked. Because if it didn't work, then you've got to come up with something else. So that's more the idea around using what somebody has done before.
No, I just want to come back and say thank you. I think you've clarified that because in accountancy, you often buy products off the shelf that you can use, you know, and this isn't that.
This is not that.
And I think it's just important to say that explicitly.
Yes.
Because otherwise it could cause confusion. So sorry.
And then the second part is, I think, and this is why I said in the roadmap for the CA that they need to initiate the process for AI implementation. Because if you're going to have a data scientist or somebody else coming through to actually initiate this process, they're going to push through something that does not meet your requirement in the end. And I think that is so important that if the CA starts off this process, they understand what that end decision needs to be. So they can guide the AI implementation throughout the roadmap, and then use the technical expert to actually provide them insight into the actual algorithms that will be used.
So I immediately think, you know, are we training people to do that? Because to assume that somebody's trained as a CA would be able to do that, because I for the first time heard how artificial intelligence works a little bit 2 presentations ago. And I was fascinated how mechanical it was, you know, very interesting, but very mechanical. And I'm wondering whether we are preparing CAs to really give those inputs in the beginning, because I do think a basic understanding of the process is very important. Prof. Ryan said yesterday, it sounds like you listened to him, but the markets are now being governed by algorithms, and we had a massive drop in the markets the other day. So are we saying it's the algorithms making the market drop? Yeah. You know, so I'm just saying, as a business, for me, I do think as accountants, you know, that those inputs will be crucial. But we need to be trained to do that.
So just on that point, we've just created the first course in South Africa or probably even broader than that, for 4IR for chartered accountants. And what it does specifically is it creates the knowledge for chartered accountants on machine learning. How does a machine learn? On natural language processing, on blockchain. It has all of these elements that CAs need to do, and it's currently part of SAICA's CPD program. So I think people can sign up for that, and now we're starting to move into that direction.
So would people know where to access that? So this is not about punting UJ projects or anything like that, but I think you talking to a live audience.
Yeah.
So where would people access that?
So if you go to SAICA's website, it's one of the CPD courses on SAICA's website that you can access. That gives you great insight for a start on the fourth industrial revolution. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is a master's qualified industrial designer and senior lecturer within the Department of Industrial Design. He is a registered PhD candidate with the project title Roadmap to Develop South Africa's Small-Scale Manufacturing Capabilities Utilizing Available Resources. Speaking to us this morning on Society 4.0 in the UJ Department of Industrial Design. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Martin Bolton, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg.
Oops, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad there's a few of you left around here. Keeping the best for last, I can see. I'm going to be sort of skimming through quite a few different things, but to start things off, just to recap on a few of the different catchphrases that have been educational and quite confusing at the same time. Industry 4.0, Fourth Industrial Revolution, Age of Automation, Age of Artificial Intelligence, Augmented Reality, Blended Reality, Artificial General Intelligence, Systems Control, Innovative Technology, How Technology Shapes Society, and How Technology Can Benefit Society. That leads me to the last catchphrase then that you'll get of the day, which is Society 4.0. How can new technologies be used to benefit society? How can they be used to develop future solutions to current problems? And how can they create opportunities? There's a lot of fear around this new wave of technologies, but there's a lot of opportunities to grab hold of the technology. Man is a tool-using animal. Without tools, he is nothing. With tools, he is all. This is a Scottish philosopher who died in 1881. Fourth Industrial Revolution, digital technologies are tools to shape and develop society. And that leads me to why, I didn't choose the term Society 4.0, but it goes hand in hand with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. 3D printers, 3D scanners, computers, the CAD design software, digital sketching, model making, even a can of spray paint, and augmented reality, virtual reality, machine learning. We see all of these as tools that designers use or that people use to manipulate and develop or manipulate their surroundings. When it comes to where we are in the globe, we need to look at where our context is here. In Johannesburg, South Africa, in Africa, and what do we need? And what is appropriate for where we are? What I'm going to be taking you through is an example of the industrial design process about product design, research and development, and design for manufacture. This will be an example of a student project undertaken in our third year BA Industrial Design course. From there, I'll go into discussing some of the previous technologies that some of the other speakers have spoken about. I'll be looking at or talking about how 3D printing, CNC cutting, and the use of these tools, how they actually dovetail within the actual industrial design process. Then I'll move on to the control side, using the control, automation, and coding in an appropriate and accessible way with what we can do within the department and what's appropriate for our setting here in Johannesburg. And then I will end off with where I see or where the department is trying to steer to next. Okay, the industrial design process, basically it starts with problem identification at the beginning or a briefing session where there is an identified need for something that a product may able to fulfill that need. Then it would lead on to the research and brainstorming, then on to ideation, concept development, and thinking up possible solutions to that problem. Then it leads into choosing a specific solution and then refining that to a point where it is able to be manufactured and implemented. This is an example of a third-year project where the required brief was a floor-standing fan, where the initial pages of sketching here you can see it's just very free, explorative brainstorming sketching, where the student was trying to look at different avenues of what could be an interesting, novel approach for a floor-standing fan. And you can see the influence of the sort of octopus at the bottom and the fluid forms of that creature. That was chosen as his specific avenue that he wanted to develop this product to suit that as a start point. Then once the design is at a point where the paper or sketching on paper is a limiting factor, then it starts moving into the actual computer environment. And that's where we use various CAD or computer-based software packages to convert that idea from a sketch or two-dimensional surface then into a three-dimensional virtual CAD model. So this is where the Industry 4.0 sort of playground starts to create more opportunities for us. Once the model is converted or ready within the CAD environment, it is then able to be manipulated, and these are created as CAD renders or virtual photos of the actual product outcome, and this is before any product is actually made. So using the computer software is able to create realistic images of what the product may be at the end if it is actually mass manufactured, but not using any manufacturing tooling yet. This would be to get client buy-in, sort of design approval before any molds would be made. The final stage of the design process would be for this to be actually manufactured as a full-scale working prototype, and these are the methods that was used. This was several years back. Using sort of handmade models, silicone tooling, rigid tooling, and then on the bottom right of that image you can see the final prototype outcome. Okay, so that's the standard design process from an idea through to a manufacturable outcome. The designs in our department, we have got some of them that engage with the technology transfer office where we intend on actually getting some of these products made. And the student who designed that floor standing fan, he carried on and did his master's where he developed an innovative beehive, and he's actually running a business of manufacturing the molds, manufacturing beehives, and sort of shipping these products across the country. Okay, so on to digital fabrication. The term digital fabrication is where now we have the three-dimensional, the virtual CAD model, but then we're going to try to take that CAD model back into the physical environment, the physical space. So something that you can, from something that you can see on the screen to something that you can hold in your hand. Okay, so 3D printing as a tool to create models from CAD. There's a lot of hype around 3D printing, where these are the two largest 3D printers that we have in the department, and you can see they're just standing in the back of the master's room. They get used when they need to be used, and they are waiting to be used when they aren't required. It's just another tool in the inventory or collection of technologies that designers would use. This is Antonius parabolic cooker, where this is his outcome of his master's project, where this is a automatic solar tracking solar cooker made from a parabolic reflector and using a lot of the robotic components that the students presented yesterday. This is a good example of the accessible and appropriate technology for the South African setting. So Antonio worked with several small-scale food processors or people that process food within Johannesburg and understood their needs and requirements. And from that, he developed this a collection of off-grid food processing systems. The solar cooker is one of the more complex of the collection. And this then looks at using this technology in the design finalization and design for manufacture. So basically the last sort of few phases of the design process. Another example, using 3D printing within the industrial design syllabus. This is an aluminium extrusion wall hook that was designed by my first year students last year. And through engaging with cardboard from the sketching, making test models, you can see just craft cut out with a craft knife, to the point where it feels like it should be working. Then the student then takes it across into the CAD environment, that's SolidWorks on the right, creates the model, sees how the actual components will fit together. This is a virtual or a CAD image. And from then, I was 3D printing all of the students' prototypes or all of their designs from the entire class. So you can see with the thin wall thickness, this is intended for aluminium extrusion, which you can see a lot of the window frames and furniture and door frames around here, made with that same manufacturing process. And then at the end of that, having the actual operating real outcome, which the student could then photograph and include in her project exhibition. Other avenues or other areas that 3D printing is used in the actual syllabus, it is for creating realistic one-to-one product outcomes at the end of the design process. This is a second year project where the students developed these handheld lighters, and these were 3D printed and included the internal components from existing lighters. So it's a really accurate and effective way to assess the design outcome without having to invest in any tooling. Because investing in tooling for a lighter like this, it means that you're intending on manufacturing tens to hundreds of thousands of them, which you can see as a design project is not necessary. But then because we have this technology, it doesn't mean that the other methods of hand making or hand manipulating prototypes is then obsolete. You can see the collection of foam developmental models behind this final prototype. The hand making of models goes hand in hand with the technological or 3D printing of the final outcomes. It's just another tool that we use. When it comes to the robotics and the electronic control and automation sides of things, we only in the last 2 years have been integrating it into our actual syllabus, and a lot of the technologies are available locally, and you can see with the engineering department, a lot of it is incorporated into their projects that they undertake. To give you an idea of this, this is a small robotics board or the Arduino platform board that you can buy for near to 300 Rand. And that's an entire programmable computer, and that can control lights, motors, control keypads, screens, etc. So it's a very accessible and engaging platform to work with. And you can see buying a full kit with the board, USB cable, the software is free, install it on your computer. You can see 497 Rand from Mantech, which is in town. You're able to then have that as a starting point, and it's cheap enough for us to integrate into our labs as well. And you can see when it comes to environmental monitoring or trying to get inputs and sort of read temperature, humidity, motion, sort of angle, sort of GPS coordinates, all of the componentry is extremely accessible and very cheap. You can see here, this is an article where it said 21 different Arduino modules. So a lot of these modules, you see there's like small little legs. Those can plug straight into the Arduino board. And then using the code that you can download, you are able to then manipulate the code, program it, send it to the Arduino, and sort of slowly figure out how to actually operate the product. So then that's the electronic components. Then it means in the industrial design process, we can then integrate those components within the rest of the housings and components that would normally be part of the project. For example, here, this is Antonius Cook solar panel. In the bottom there's a sort of solar charging circuit, there's a small Arduino board, and there's two different motors, one which pivots the entire cooker towards or rolls that front wheel along till it points to the sun, and another stepper motor that pivots the dish until the focal point of the parabola is underneath the pot. So that meant that through open source collections of the coding knowledge, he was able to develop that, get it working, prototyped, and then engage with his actual participants to review and assess the actual outcome. And another example, this is Oratile. She's busy doing her master's in our department as well. And here's her Arduino set up with a water flow meter, where she's busy working with small-scale farmers around Johannesburg in attempting to develop an irrigation solution to meet their requirements. And what came through the field research was their biggest requirement was monitoring the amount of water usage, like per month, but also if you're watering specific plants, how can you specifically monitor or dose each plant with a specific volume of water, so you can keep track of the plant requirements and sort of be able to monitor your water usage. So you can see here, it's a small collection of components. When it comes to the learning of the coding, that's okay, so you can see it's all sort of relatively low cost components. Okay, so a lot of the technology, or what we had in the department, what we had at our disposal, without trying to get any heavy corporate investment. Obviously, you can hear in the discussions of the previous presenters, it's not like there is an untapped budget for development in the university. So now with all of the images that were shown in the last few days, this is a website where you can go online, you type in sort of like open source collection of people publishing their designs, but not just their designs, but also the sequences of how to create the designs. So just for instance, I had a look in here to see what sort of designs there are around a robotic arm. So you can see that in a lot of the automation systems, you need, or you've got an opportunity to create a 3-axis or 5-axis robotic arm or robotic systems. And in the previous presentation, or a few presentations back, the wooden board cutting machine or the 3D printer and the 3-arm axis 3D printer yesterday. Basically here in Instructables, you type in let's make, or what would you like to make, and I just put in there robotic arm, and it ends up opening sort of pages upon pages of different versions of robotic arms that different Instructables or different people have published on this website. And you can see just the collection of images there. At the top left, there's like a small little wooden plywood model, but then 3 to the right, there's quite a heavy industrial-looking robot arm. And then in these collections, it takes you through sequence, step-by-step, how you create these. If there are any 3D source files, sort of show you where you can download them. With the actual motor control or the actual Arduino, let's say the stepping control systems, they tell you how to do it. They give you the code, you can load it, and you can then try and make with all of the photocopiers you saw stood aside in the bottom floor of the library. Just need to get permission to dismantle all of that, but we'll try and see if they can donate a couple. Okay, then, now the integration of the Arduino and the programming and the control within the industrial design process within the department. This was a third-year project I did with my students last year, where it was developing a lighting device, but an interactive lighting device, but the project was titled in a way that it was a light painting device. So it wasn't a projector with a sort of projecting a animated image. They were actually needing to control the light and create some sort of mood or atmosphere through what the light, how it sort of pools in the area. So this is Ryan Walters. He wanted to develop this Arduino-based control system where you can see in the front of that light there's like a pinkish perspex cover. So that's using some laser cutting to sort of cut the network of holes. Again, you can see using freehand sketching in the idea generative process of the design. And those models, all that you see on this page, those are all just cardboard mock-up models, but using whatever materials that you have at your disposal, whatever tools that you have at your disposal to get a proof of concept system working. And you can see in that, or the image is very small on the screen, but you had a sort of circulation fan in there, sort of Arduino starting to control the lighting components. And again, so you saw the Arduino is about 300 Rand, but what the students have found out is that they go to China Mall down at the bottom of town, and they can come back with like a huge checkers bag full of different light control pieces, LED strips, LED drivers, all for like a fraction of what it would cost in like a large hardware store. And then they would dismantle those, take parts out, and through that process of playing with the stuff and taking it apart, figuring it out, and then recompiling a new product, they learn a hell of a lot through that process. So skipping forward a bit through the design process, you can see the design schematic on the left there is a network of 7 different LEDs, and then those were part of an LED strip, but then the control of those LEDs was then done through that little processing board. Then you can see the different colored pieces of plastic creating different patterns of light on the wall, and then the different sort of sequencing and phasing of the different LEDs is what he used to create this mood. Again, here is a computer-generated render output, or this is more like a mixed media image, so it's like a real photograph, but then overlaying CAD-generated content on the top. And then that then is including the Arduino in the actual development. And then what's happened is, last year, Antonio and myself, so Antonio is lecturing second year design practice, I'm lecturing third year and overseeing the BA Industrial Design. We submitted a proposal for the Innovative Teaching Grant, and we've gotten funding to get a single pair of the VR headset goggles, as well as budget to get a whole big bunch of different Arduino boards, different stepper motors, different sort of control components, to then basically experiment with these different technologies within the second year industrial design and within the third year, and ideally also within honors, and then just experiment and document the student feedback, the outcomes of the projects, and see how they are, or how effectively they're able to be integrated into the syllabus as extra tools to complement the already sort of interesting collection of content that we have. So here's, do you remember the sort of augmented reality or blended reality? Here's an interesting image. So hopefully we will sort of figure this stuff out, but these are now not my images. But you got the computer model, but now you've got the headset and you're able to visualize and engage with that computer model. But then like the mining department, you get those hollow headsets where you can actually see the computer model overlaid into a real-time, real space. So like that floor standing fan project, it could be something that you'd maybe put the goggles on and you're actually looking at the product, you're walking around the product, and you may be even engaging with the product. So you can see for the visualization of the CAD data, but then also for inspecting sort of quality control, assessing assemblies, figuring out all the internal complexities within products. Also, there's space that we can see how that could work. But then also for the free form, you saw with the sketching at the initial start of the design process, free form sketching, explorative sort of doodles, brainstorming, etc. There's also the virtual sculpting, ideating, and three-dimensional sketching, where you're sort of drawing in 3 dimensions in front of you, and then that then could ideally be a very interesting and engaging aspect for students to then still feel free with the sketching, but then be able to actually walk around and sort of paint in 3D. And then Denver, who presented earlier today, he's on meeting with him on Friday to sort of experiment with one of these. It's called the Google brush or some sort of brush. And then more development in the coding side. You saw how hectic the robotic things are with the students yesterday. But again, we're trying to sort of integrated into the entire industrial design product. So that you can see I've tried to link with the robotics team and with the mining department, also relationships sort of slowly trying to be set up. What can we do? How can we benefit the other departments, and what can we learn from them? And what can we do in our own faculty? Okay, so we want to include the control, the coding, and the sort of those components as designed for manufacture in the actual housing of the products. Ideally, as myself and the lecturers become more comfortable with the coding, we could obviously then can increase the complexities with the students, but also then obviously learn from them. Integrate coding and control into the syllabus. Right now, it's still also sort of quite experimental. But then effectively utilize resources salvaged from e-waste. Again, you can see if a product stops operating, a lot of the components that are still in that product are still perfectly fine. And for one single stepper motor, for that, let's say that solar cooker, it can be, let's say, 200 to 500 Rand. So it's, as an automation component, it's still relatively affordable, but for a student to buy a few of them, you can see it's still quite expensive. But then if machines like that, I'm not sure what's happening to those machines downstairs, that would probably be enough components for the entire faculty, sort of build robots for like the next sort of few years. Then create and publish open source designs. My master's project, which was a low-cost water filter, is on that open source ecology website, which was mentioned earlier. But ideally, as was also mentioned, is that the development of these systems need to suit South African context. Ideally, that our department develops these systems or these solutions, but then also makes it freely available on these open source websites. And yeah, that's basically everything. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, any questions? I have one from Andre.
Thank you. I think your field was made for the time we're living in. I think you're lucky in that sense, whereas with the accountants, you could see there was a lot of hard work figuring out where does this fit in. I think with you, it's almost too natural, it's very easy. So I don't actually have a question, but have you, let me ask it as a question. Have you considered approaching some of these recycling companies that take technology and then, crush it up? Because that's what they do. So, in my house now, right now, I've got maybe 10 pieces of oldish equipment that I won't throw in the dustbin. I can't give to anybody because they're not working, and I will be taking them to this place to crush. So have you considered that? Because I think you'd be able to access amazing types and numbers of equipment.
Yeah, we haven't approached them specifically, but if you tell me the name of the company, then I would
Desco, I think, is what they're called.
The nearest to that is the budget waste, which oversees all of the university waste. I get in contact with them. They organized a 3-color laser printer for me at the beginning of this research break, where I said, are there any sort of larger machines that are around that are sort of destined to get chucked out? And then they said they'll check around, and then they brought the one to me. So that's where definitely there's huge opportunities, but then it's also sort of do the legwork of figuring out where to go.
So in my experience of FADA, it's an expensive place to study, just because of all of the fields have requirements that are quite expensive. And I love the idea of scavenging almost for tools that could be used to train these youngsters. So I'm going to send you an email with I don't know anybody there, but I've taken stuff there and I've seen what they do with it. They literally take a laptop that's not working anymore and they crush the thing to pieces. And they get tons of it, tons. So I'm sure if you approach them and you make it a corporate social responsibility type of approach and you say, look, we're training youngsters, yeah. I'm almost certain they'll tell you, come and fetch what you need, because they're going to crush it.
That sounds good.
So do you want any of us to bring you any old equipment?
If it's, so like, let's say like an old modem or something, definitely not. But like anything where there's like motors and things.
An old laptop, for example?
Laptop, maybe. But
because I think that's what you might want to think about. What is it that you need? What is it that you would want? We've got 2,000-3,000 people working at UJ, all of them middle class. All of them will bring you a whole bag full of junk if you're not careful. Yeah. But if you ask, I suspect you'll get more than you could use, in a day. without going to Desco.
Yeah. So you say it's called Desco.
I think it's that, but I'll get you the exact details
Okay,
and I'll
cool.
send you the details.
We did the, every year there's a faculty, a collaborative project that runs within the faculty. In the past it was called Green Week, sort of trying to develop, where all the third year students work together, all the students from all the different departments. And then last year at the faculty strategic breakaway, I mentioned or discussed that maybe we could do this sort of salvaged type, e-waste type project. And then beginning of this year, I ran that project. And that was where the budget waste guys organized loads of different things. And then the students, it was also linked to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where the students were trying to visualize their future in sort of society. And then they used all of that e-waste to create a like sculptural form or a product. And then that was very free because it was not trying to actually physically like control, because you can see doing that project will take, let's say, more than a week, but this was run just in a week. And then the types of ideas that the students were coming up with was very, very interesting. Some of them with very like hope in the future, everything sort of people, machines, and nature all going to be like so integrated and it's going to be so amazing. But then the next group along would be like, we're all going to be destroyed. So it was like this very sort of big contrast between the different opinions. And then next year, we would like to try and run the project again, but somehow see how it could be, how can it lead from that. So that's where maybe sort of linking corporates in and planning further ahead in advance and getting, maybe linking to the other, like the mining department and the engineering department would be a very valuable collaboration as well. So thanks. Other questions?
Any more questions? All right, if you don't have questions, I'd just like to give this.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, and just like that, we have reached the end of our fantastic two-day program. I'd just really like to thank Liana and Dr. Andre for putting together a winter school of this magnitude. I think I myself, being from a marketing background and a broadcasting background, have actually learned a lot from the speakers that came and did their presentations this morning. And it also generated a conversation online as well. So for those that are streaming, we'd also like to thank you for taking the time out to stream and engage us in the conversations that were taking place today. But the conversation does continue. May we just use the hashtag WinterSchool4IR, and whatever developments might come up, then I'm sure Liana and Dr. Andre will be aware of those and will definitely be incorporated into the next discussion of this sort. Thank you very much all for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and interact with us as well and to engage yourself with the speakers as well. Safe travels back home, and I hope we'll see you at the next winter school. Thank you very much for having me as well. It's been quite the honor to host you at the UJ Winter School 4IR. Thank you.